we now move on to our panel, and I would kindly ask every panelist to try and keep the opening remarks to below 10 minutes. We kick off with Dr. Michael Charles. Dr. Charles is a seasoned diplomat and international development professional with over 18 years of experience providing technical, managerial, and operational support to field and country offices for the Red Cross, as well as the public and private sector. Dr. Charles, how can we ensure that the health crisis that we're currently experiencing doesn't turn into a food crisis? And what are the risks facing Africans? And in your experience, how do we overcome them?
Well, thank you very much, Chris, and great to be here. I'll definitely answer those questions from a humanitarian perspective and from being in the field. Obviously, as the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, we see a lot of what is happening within the communities. And I think for me, the question is really, the health crisis has already started causing food insecurity. We can see that with COVID now, especially if we look at the numbers pre-COVID vis-a-vis now, post-COVID or during COVID. If we just go back to a few of the data, we know that Southern Africa, or Africa as a whole, has been faced with culmination of droughts, floods, both affecting our produce and the various harvests. And we have in some countries where the devastation is so severe. If we look at Zimbabwe, for example, at the community level, we're seeing, and at a macro level, we're seeing that at least half of the population are food insecure. I mean, WFP comes up with figures of 43 million as of January of this year. In Lesotho, we are seeing that a third of the population are food insecure. And in Zambia, which we used to really produce a lot of maize in the past, we're now seeing that a fifth of the population is insecure. And COVID hasn't made this any better. And that's why we're saying that the health crisis has already caused food insecurity. But what can we learn from all this? Obviously, we're now seeing that the trends are now changing from typical rural food insecurity to now urban food insecurity. And we see that in the urban townships. We see that in Durban. We see that in Jamestown and Benoni, in Johannesburg, and in many other areas. And I remember the very first days of COVID, when we went into the communities, when people were really saying, this thing has hit us so hard, we're not able to feed ourselves, we're not able to put food on the table. And that was even before many people started losing their jobs. So we're seeing that, the consequences are that there's definitely a salary loss, there's a loss in remittance, because this is a global pandemic, and there's even the food hike. About 20% hike in food prices has really shown that people that used to go to bed with a full stomach are not able to do that anymore. So how do we address this moving forward? And I think the question is, how can we use the health crisis? How can we use the pandemic to also help solve the food crisis? From my perspective and from our experience, before COVID, we were always told there was not enough money to support the drought-affected communities, to support the people that needed our support the most in terms of food. But we saw all of a sudden that with the COVID, there was obviously a lot of money around. So really, it is our responsibility as humanitarians, as the private sector, to see how we can best tap into that money and see how we can use it to the benefit of the farmers, to the benefits of the smallholder farmers, and to the communities at large. So it is really, how do we use that wisely? How do we put it to where it is needed the most? And how do we use it as an opportunity in Southern Africa to get small business savvy, market access savvy, and digital savvy? And that brings me to my next point to say, how do we solve the food crisis? We need to use digital transformation, and this period has really been an eye-opener for many people who are not digital savvy. They're now seeing that a lot can be done using digital transformation. And I think this technology needs to be brought down also to the smallholder farmers. And so really looking at all the various innovations and seeing how technology can be a way of life. I mean, we can give the example of M-Pesa in Kenya with the farmers. We can give examples in Nigeria as well of what they're doing with the digital divide, and really linking through technology, linking the smallholder farmers to bigger markets. So I think that's something we can look at in future as well. And then the third thing is really, how do we renew our focus on smallholder farmers? And as we all know, 60 to 80% of people across Africa are smallholder farmers. We've just known that 65% of the land in Africa is arable. So how do we use that potential? How do we move that forward? I think is key. And our purpose as the Red Cross movement, in terms of being community-based, is really how do we move from just having subsistence farmers, farmers that are surviving, how do we move them to farmers that are thriving? And I think that's what we are about, and that's what we've seen. So you really using the technology that we've seen, using the funding opportunities, and really seeing how best we can use social protection, safety nets, making sure that we can use issues around education to really be able to drive the force when it comes to food insecurity. I think together we have a role to play, and we're really counting on the private sector, counting on the governments, counting on other humanitarians to see how do we make the shift from really just focusing on the short term to focusing more on the long term, having more longer term commitments. And I'm glad even with the African Union, we're having the Agenda 2063, which also focuses a lot on food security. We're having the Sustainable Development Goals, which looks at zero hunger. And as the Red Cross movement as well, we're actually going into a launch of our long-term strategy, which is a 10-year strategy focusing on zero hunger. So really hoping and looking forward that with health and using health as the entry point, we can really use it to support the people in our communities in terms of being more food secure. Thank you, Chris. You're on mute.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. Yeah, that's quite extraordinary figures. Half of Zimbabwe, a third of Lesotho, and a fifth of Zambia are food insecure. I didn't realize it was that severe. That's really sobering statistics. We now move on to Mandla Nkomo. Mandla is the Regional Managing Director for Southern Africa at Solidarid. He leads country operations in South Africa, Mozambique, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. And I'm sure, Mandla, those figures that Dr. Charles quoted aren't unfamiliar to you. Solidarid runs programs in horticulture, livestock production, soy and sugarcane outgrower schemes for smallholder farmers that aim to improve the quality and quantity of yields while improving infrastructure and landscape management, and also positively influencing policy in formulation. With over 10 years experience in establishing agribusinesses and facilitating market linkages between established commercial entities and rural communities, Mandla continues to prove a strong case for the need to commercialize smallholder farmers as a food secure strategy. Mr. Nkomo, how can we support and get agriculture to be more sustainable, and what role specifically do smallholder farmers play in that sustainability?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. I'm really excited just listening to Dr. Laus and also Dr. Charles, that it seems like there's a convergence of thought around where some of the levers are and what are some of the drivers that will take us to that transformation. Because like you rightly say, the figures are startling, but I think what is even more startling is that a country like South Africa, which is at the top of the rankings from a food security perspective in Africa, also has about a third of its population actually food insecure, or at least going hungry every day. So what that points to, Chris, is that when we tackle this question, we need to look at a food systems approach. We need to look at a food systems approach because that way we'll be able to properly locate the role that smallholders can play as part of that food system, and how the food system itself makes the right kind of inputs available to farmers who need them, how we are providing the right kind of training and knowledge transfer to the farmers that are the food producers, and how that food actually gets transported, or the logistics of getting the food to where it's needed and where we can start to deal with food security. And our view is quite strongly that a big part of that answer is going to be about focusing on smallholders, because, well, they are the majority of food producers. So in a South African context, for example, the fact that we've got potentially 14 million people going hungry cannot be de-linked to the 2 million agricultural households, particularly in the former homelands, that have got very minimal participation in food production, who have become food consumers even though they are sitting on productive assets. So we need to unlock that, because that then indicates why in a South African context, we can still have food insecurity in a country that is technically food secure. Now, if you go outside of our borders, I'm glad that Dr. Charles mentioned Zambia. Do you know, Chris, that from a Zambian perspective, Zambia has had a maize surplus, I think, for over a decade now. So it's absolutely unbelievable that even with that number of a food surplus, Zambia still has the highest figures in sub-Saharan Africa for severe and acute malnutrition of children under 5 years old. So it's a food systems issue. And I think that if we are not, targeting the enablement that needs to happen in strengthening the food system, in making the food systems more responsive to people's food and nutrition security needs, we're going to fail. And my view is that it really starts with the smallholders. It really starts with the smallholders, and understanding that, first of all, Chris, they're not a homogeneous bunch. There's actually different livelihood pathways that smallholders are engaged in. And there's a recent report that's been done by the Initiative for Smallholder Finance, which talks about the pathways of prosperity, where you've got some people moving primarily from being subsistence farmers to being semi-commercial, and at the same time, some people moving from rural areas to earn income off farm and transitioning back to rural areas with that money. So it's very complex. And if we just take a very unitary approach and look at how smallholders function, we'll probably prescribe the wrong things. And our experience as Solidaridad has been exactly that the biggest success we can achieve in getting transformation is really about appreciating the diverse nature of smallholders, finding where the gaps are, and unleashing the power of technology, knowledge, and better resource use efficiency into that sector. And then we're starting to see change. So digital is absolutely critical. A classic example I'd like to share, Chris, is that, do you know that as at maybe 2 weeks ago, we had been able to give smallholders, for the first time in Southern Africa, an opportunity to know the state of their soils? Because soil testing services, and the soil is the basis of all food production, are totally non-existent for more than 80% of food producers. And the issue was not even a technology issue. It was a system issue. How do you get digital to make soil testing possible for small farmers in a way that they can afford, provide advisory that is easy for them to interpret, and they can utilize it to bring about better production? And we've been able to use spectral technology using digital scanners to provide soil tests to over 4,000 smallholder farmers in less than 6 months. And our target is to say, look, what if we get to 1 million smallholder farmers being able to understand the state of their soil for the first time? It completely changes their prospects as food producers. And I think the impact on the food system is going to be quite huge. And I believe that that's where the transformation starts to happen. So business as usual cannot work anymore, Chris. We need to take the system apart. We've had an opportunity to press pause on it. Let's look under the engine. And in my view is that let's start to do the tinkering that will get this engine moving in the right direction to deliver better food outcomes for our communities. I think you're still muted, Chris.
This is a it's technology. It's not always easy. Now, Mandla, I just wanted to say from my side, my experience of the smallholder farmers in Zambia specifically, when we were doing work up there, I was absolutely astonished at their productivity. And it's actually smallholder farmers that are producing the maize surpluses. I was always under the impression it was the big commercial guys, but the commercial farmers aren't producing the maize because the government regulates the price. So they're producing the maize seed, and it's smallholder farmers. And that really opened my eyes to the capacity that these farmers actually have. So thank you for that, and we'll pick up on some of those points in the discussion a little later. But I would like to move on to our next panelist, Mr. Benny van Zyl. He's the general manager of TLU SA, one of our agricultural unions and the oldest agricultural union in South Africa. I've known Benny for many years, and I can attest to the fact that Benny simply doesn't do anything in half measures, and agriculture is what he lives for. As a cattle and game farmer in the Tapazimbi district of the Northwest in South Africa, Benny is also one of the country's foremost agricultural leaders. In 2001, he applied for the vacant post of general manager of TLU SA, and today he remains just as enthusiastic about representing the values of this oldest of agricultural unions in South Africa as he was 20 years ago. Benny, interestingly enough, also played an important role in advising the Georgian government on agricultural matters after gaining independence from the Soviet Union. And this, Benny always says, still remains one of the biggest highlights of his career. As TLU SA, their main aim is to keep farmers farming safely and sustainable, and is constantly on the lookout for innovative farming methods like cooperative farming models that could lessen the risk for single farmers by getting farmers to pool their resources. Benny, it's always an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I know that English is your second language. So just briefly, in your view, what are the key challenges facing farmers in South Africa? And is it a question of farmers needing more innovation, or maybe a question of just doing the basics better than we're doing them currently?
Thank you, Chris, and all the other panelists, and especially for organizations such as SYNGENTA that sponsor us to make this opportunity for us something that we can do. It's very important for us to interact with each other, because knowledge is nothing worth if it's only yours. You have to deal it out to other people, and you should gain from them as well. For us as agricultural union, but as I think for South Africa, we should realize that I think the biggest asset that every country at this stage could have is a productive farmer, because without food on the table, the whole of any country will actually stop. They will not function. So for us, that is very important to make sure that we actually make sure that the agricultural process is running and it's sustainable. And I think that is a big problem for us, especially when we talk about one of our continents that do have the best perhaps potential, but it's not actually utilized at this stage, and that is Africa. We can do much better, and there's a lot of concerns that we actually experience, and people can differ about this, but from my viewpoint, I think one of the big issues in Africa, but also in South Africa, is uncertainty. Uncertainty in the policy environment. If the government mentioned that they want to put in their constitution, we want to actually expropriate land without compensation, then the investors will hang back and say, what's going on? Because investment is the name of the game if you want to better yourself for more productivity and for better technology, and to make sure that you are competitive. So uncertainty in the policy environment is a big issue for me. And if governments can realize that they should be the farmer's best friend, they should actually bend backwards as far as they possibly can to make sure that they make it possible for the farmers to be productive as much as possible, that the actually environment gives them the opportunity to do. The other big issue, and it's not in a certain numbering to follow what is the most important, because we already heard about the climate issues, and that's for sure a big issue for us. And especially in South Africa, everyone realized that South Africa is a very marginal agricultural country compared with other countries all over the world. But still, our farmers are net exporters, and therefore we have great respect for them, and we are thankful for what they do. But the reason for that, I think, is for role players such as Syngenta and other role players that do quite a lot of research to make sure that we have the best knowledge on the table. And then we used to have a very good extension services. At this stage is actually not anymore the situation. It's a pity, because you have to create knowledge and create research, and then you have to distribute it to your farmers so that they can make use of that. So that's a very big issue for us. Another issue for farmers is safety. Safety, not only farm attacks, but also the theft of their produce that we have all over the world. It's a big problem. Also in Africa, when I visited farmers in Zambia, they mentioned to me it's for them a big problem that they cannot actually harvest all their maize or corn, as some people call it, other countries, because a lot of it is stolen before they can get their own hands on their own produce. And then a big problem for me that's also creating a lot of unnecessarily problems is the service delivery that we experience because of perhaps corruption, perhaps not the right person in the right job within our different levels of government. You need support systems, and if you go to a government institution, they actually should help you very fluently and very quickly, that you can go on with your produce and your work that you want to do. And then financing is also creating at this stage a big problem for us. And I think especially for our small-scale farmers, for them to actually make sure that they can get the necessary finance to be in production. That is for me some of the big points that is standing out. I want to mention something else, Chris, and that is that there are two set of rules that, if we would like it or not, they will always have the last word. They will always have the last say in this whole process. And the first one is the economic rules. If you do not stick to that, the economy will actually, the market principle rules, they will be decisive in the end of the day. If you do not play that right, the market will throw you off. So you have to make sure that you play this balancing game of input cost regarding your market situation and the whole process of that, to make sure that you stick to the market principle rules. And therefore, certain things should be in place. For me, in my viewpoint, I think private ownership is a very good thing for people to start investing. And I know all over the world it's not specifically the case, but if it is your own property, a person are much more willing to invest in that. And that is for me a very good thing to do. So that is the one thing. The one set of rules is this economic rules, the market principles. But the other thing, luckily for us as the people all over the world, is that the nature laws and nature rules, they always strive to go back to balance. Sometimes we as people, our input is of such a nature that it actually makes it almost impossible for nature to go back to that balance. But luckily for us, that is the case. And I think those are the two set of rules that we cannot change if you want to or not. And if you said, but I do not care about the market principle rules, it's not your choice. The market will be decisive at the end of the day. Actually, the market principles will be the only mechanism to make sure who is the best person at the end of the day. You sort out all these entrepreneurs at the end of the day to make sure that you are still there because you gain success and you strive for productivity and all the factors that we can add to that. So for me, we have constraints, we have certain hurdles in our agricultural process. But luckily, our farmers are very innovative. And you mentioned the process of what we should do, innovation in the helping achieve sustainable development. Chris, you actually give the answer as well. I support you there that we should stick to the basics. Make sure that we establish our markets, that the finance process is right, that we stick to the right economic rules as well as the nature rules. We cannot change that. And we have to make sure that is the way that we can gain sustainability and create an opportunity for our children and our grandchildren to be there as well, because we are not going to misuse our land. For us as entrepreneurs, we have to make sure that at the end of the day, it's your responsibility, and you take the risk as an entrepreneur, as a farmer, to go and bring all those other production factors together, such as labor, capital, and then your resources, especially the land, and thanks for the previous input regarding the land. It's so important that you utilize your land correctly, but also the water. That's for me a great concern, that we haven't got enough water, especially in South Africa, and now we actually do not make sure that we keep our water clean. There are too many problems regarding that as well. So there's a lot of challenges regarding that, but you as an entrepreneur have to make a success out of that with taking into consideration all these other challenges. Because it's a very great privilege for any farmer to be in nature and to do this work. But if governments all over Africa and in South Africa specifically, because I cannot talk on behalf of other countries, realize that we have to do everything our utmost best to make sure that we can keep our farmers in production and make it for them a sustainable opportunity to create that situation that we are food secure in all over our country. We heard about how many countries do not have enough food, and we will not get it if we keep not our farmers intact. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Benny. Thank you for your insights. Someone that has served his time in organized agriculture, but also farmed himself. And just to underline the point of the importance of farmers, I think if there was two things that COVID did, it was it accelerated already existing trends. We spoke about digitization and using digital technology, which was a positive thing. But it also amplified existing problems and benefits. And I think one of the benefits that it did amplify was the absolute crucial value of agriculture in African economies. In South Africa, agriculture was the one part of the economy that actually managed to pull the rest of the economy through the ditch. But also the role that farmers played in producing food and distributing food to poor communities was really quite something to behold. So, Benny, I agree with you absolutely. I think that agriculture, if there was a greater appreciation that agriculture is the bedrock on which all economies are built, we would be better off than we are at the moment. So from one farmer to the next, our next speaker is Mr. Todd Dugmore. Todd is a maize grower and a Syngenta Leadership Academy alumni. He's also a tourism business owner and an adventurer at heart. He's the 5th generation on his family farm at Salt Lake, which lies between Douglas and Hopetown in the Northern Cape in South Africa. He and his wife have a commercial cattle herd, and they also own the Duggies Orange River Rafting and Witfontein Game Lodge. And somebody who's just returned from the Orange River to go and catch some yellowfish, I can heartily suggest that you visit Doug on the Orange River. Todd is also passionate about meeting new people and giving them the opportunity to experience nature. Family is very important to him, and he's a man with strong morals and values and believes that there needs to be a purpose to drive you and give you balance in life. Todd continuously looks for ways to improve himself and his business by staying current and innovative. Todd, you attended the much spoken about Leadership Academy, and I don't think everyone on our panel maybe knows about it, but tell us a little bit more about this quite visionary academy that's sponsored by Syngenta in collaboration with the Northwest University Business School and Thinking Fusion Africa, as well as Grain SA. How did this program help you address the challenges that you face as a farmer?
Hi all. It's fantastic to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. Chris, thank you very much. Yes, and thanks to Syngenta for the opportunity to be here and being able to share some thoughts. First of all, yeah, Chris gave some background. So obviously as a farmer, a guy on the ground, as Chris mentioned, 5th generation farmer, my interests are to, and my love is for our country, for our land, to be here. And I think that fits in well with the sustainability of what we're talking about. A good friend of mine, when I was visiting in New Zealand, one of his favorite sayings was to say, if you can't pay, you can't stay. So yes, we focus a lot on financial and sustainability, which is great, which is very important. I think that's what probably one of our primary focuses these days is that we need to be financially sustainable and keep ways of doing that. Yes, we've got to look at the triple bottom line, which has been spoken about a lot over the last few days. Look at, you have to be socially responsibility. You've got to have a look at your resources and your land and look after your grazing or your soil. So this is at the heart of what we're talking about. So it's really exciting. Thank you. To get back onto the point, or to get onto the point of the Leadership Academy, in earlier years it was Grain Academy, or Grain Academy, it's been changed to Leadership Academy, which is fitting, I reckon, because that's what it's about. It's about giving the farmer, the guy on the ground, whoever you the opportunity to develop your skills. And when I say skills, it's not necessarily your technical farming skills of knowing what the NP and K of the soil's like. It's to use one of Yanni de Villiers' favorite analogies. I remember him addressing us on that last evening. We have an extensive course of about 3 sessions, and each session is probably 3 days long. Everyone gets together, and you sit around. You get to sit around the table with people from different backgrounds, from different different types of farming. And these days, in the last few years, they've opened it up to not just specifically crop farmers. They've opened it up to other farmers, and even inviting people in different industries to join on the course, so that there can be an upskilling of our soft skills. So Yanni de Villiers spoke to us and said, farmers, and especially in South Africa, we need to expand the tool set in our toolbox. And often we're very good technically. We know what we're doing on our farm, what's happening, maybe perhaps with the cattle or with the crops and that knowledge. But when it comes to people, we often need a few more skills, and that's why it's the leadership program. It's speaking about who you are, finding out who you are, how to listen, for instance, is one of the big things that I got. So not just to speak, but to listen. So it's working on your people skills. So Yanni de Villiers says we've got maybe one tool in our toolbox, and that's a hammer, and we use it. And sometimes if the hammer's not working, we just hammer the thing harder. Where if we had other tools, sets of tools in our toolbox, we would be more effective in reaching our goal. We live in a culturally diverse country, South Africa. But I mean, Africa is diverse. The world these days is diverse. And at the end of the day, the better skills are, the better we will be in achieving our goal. Sustainability, these things that have been spoken about by our speakers previously, bringing them all together. If we can have those people skills and understand where we're going and understand them, communicate better, we're on a very good foot. So the leader is, as I mentioned, Chris, fusion with the fantastic course. The course's name is Leadership in the Connection Economy, because these days the economy it's about relationships, and that's what the course is about. That's what the whole course focuses on. Focusing on your leadership style, knowing how you work, knowing how other people work, and incorporating all of that. So that leadership in the connection economy is accredited to a university. Previous years it was Free State University. Now it is the Northwest University. It's an accredited course. So when you're done with that, it's as if you are an alumni of Free State University or Northwest University. So it is a fantastic opportunity, which I'm very grateful for. It has helped me not only in my business and how I interact with my labor and how I think about business. It's helped me with my relationships with my dad. It's father-son business, with my in-laws, and understanding the big irrigation business, irrigation farm. Coming from Douglas, we're in an irrigation area, and so that's really great. That's thinking fusion with the help of Grain SA and Yanni de Villiers and the guys. It's a wonderful initiative to take our farming forward. And then, so some practicalities of it, as I said, questions. One of the things that stood out for me was the sitting around in a room with diverse people, and actually having the conversations that you perhaps think about in your head, and having that in a place where having those conversations with people you wouldn't have, so that you can grow, develop, learn. Thanks, Chris.
Well, I think that improving your relationship with your in-laws is maybe the greatest endorsement that any program could ever have. Just to give some more background to that program, as I've understood it, as Yanni de Villiers has also explained to me, it's often white and black South Africans from different backgrounds thrown together, and then they try and solve an unsolvable problem together. And then a lot of the farmers on this course are also Afrikaans guys, and they're forced to communicate just in English. And then in one of the courses, somebody said that they had to write a poem, and then they had to recite the poem at the awards ceremony. And I always thought, what a wonderful way to get people out of their comfort zones, to get farmers to recite a poem. So yeah, I've heard wonderful things about the course, and also, of course, so important to connect people. I think a lot of what, so that Africa is blessed with so much, with so many resources, not only natural, but also human resources. I mean, you go up to Zambia and you're going to have a look at how productive those small-scale farmers actually can be if they just got a proper leg up. And I think that connecting centers of excellence in Africa is so important if we are to take the continent further, and to actually move beyond the idea of just being food secure. I think we should have the aim to really become the breadbasket of the world. There's no reason why we shouldn't be one of the leading nations, one of the leading export continents in the world. Why can't we be the new South America of the world, be exporting all over? So we now come to our questions and answer session, and I just want to remind everyone listening in that you are more than welcome to pose a question. Just type it in on the questions and answer panel on the platform you're watching the session on. Unfortunately, Dr. Larks will have to leave us at about 12:45, so we'll excuse her. I think she will just disappear off the screen, just so that you know where she's headed off to. She has another speaking engagement. So we've got another 55 minutes, so we've got quite a bit of time. So let's just kick off with the first question. And Dr. Charles, maybe I can get you to kick off the conversation. So we've all agreed on global goals when it comes to sustainable development. We know where we're headed. We've got goals that we've set, but we're seeing increasingly a debate about how to actually go about reaching those goals in different sectors, including agriculture. So do you think we should be a little bit more flexible when pursuing these goals, seeing that different parts of the world face different challenges? The challenges that we face in Africa, say with the desert locust infestations, very different to what we're seeing to the challenges in the US maybe, or Europe.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I think it's a pertinent question. How do we move forward? Do we go collectively, or do we go, with our own context? I think it's a bit of both, really, because As somebody said, we're so diverse within the continent and outside the continent, but I like to look at it the other way. I think there's so much more that unifies us, and there's so much we can learn from each other. So definitely, I think there needs to be some unified approaches. There needs to be some certain standards that we all abide with. But we need to take our own context, and what's the crisis that faces us might be slightly different. We're now faced with the fall armyworms. We're now faced with locusts. We're now faced with various catastrophes that we can handle differently. But I think one thing that unifies us is the issue of smallholder farmers. And I think we really need to make sure that we have standard policies when it comes to smallholder farmers. How do we make sure that we're able to support them on drought-resistant seeds, water harvesting, backyard gardenings, and so on, so that they can at least be able to thrive within their communities. I just listen to all the speakers, and what resonates with me so much is that as Africans, we shouldn't be begging. We shouldn't be begging for food. And I think the more we can, do together, the more we can learn from each other, the more we can support our smallholder farmers, the better for us. There's so much potential that we're not harnessing. So definitely we can learn from the other colleagues in terms of some of the development goals. But I think again we need to really look at the local solutions. And the local solutions is really pertinent because, as we say, communities might be different from each other. They have know-how within their communities. So it's really just bringing that together. And as the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, this is what we try to do as much as possible. Listen to the community members, listen to what they're going through, listen to what the solutions are, and see how best we can bring those solutions, those technologies, those funding opportunities to them to thrive. So, Chris, I think for me, it's a bit of both, but we need to work together to ensure that as Africans, we can produce food and even export and really be the new South Americans of the world. Thank you.
I'm not quite sure how the protocol works. If somebody wants to pitch in, I think you might just have to raise your hand. I think that's the best way of doing it. But Dr. Laux, yourself having worked across the globe, do you agree that we should maybe be a bit more flexible on how we approach these challenges? That maybe when we sit down and work development goals out in, say, the UN, we don't always appreciate the complexity of what's happening at ground level?
Thanks, Chris. And my response would be a bit in line with what Dr. Charles just said before, right? We need to learn from global experience. Science more or less is global, but we need to make it work in the local context. So the fall armyworm and the locust pressures in Africa are unprecedented elsewhere. And so we need, for example, technology to make this work. And so as a global business, we try to have global research principles and programs, but then we need to adapt them to the local pressures. The South African university Todd has been reporting about is also one attempt, to develop leaders for agriculture in Africa with who we can co-develop the local solutions that work best for the people on the ground. So yes, there needs to be a minimum set of standards, but then let's see how we can make it work locally.
Mandla, maybe I can bring you in here. Todd, maybe if you want to comment too. So we've got these development issues in Africa. And if you look at the resources that we have in Africa, I'm thinking, for instance, the incredible adapted genetics we have in terms of, say, the Nguni cattle or the Boron cattle or the Boer goats, or, these wonderful natural resources, or this forage that has just been commercialized by the Australians that's been taken out of the Western Cape. Are we doing the appropriate research in Africa, taking into account also that we've got climate change? I mean, you would think that the AU, with the Maputo Declaration, said that 10% of the GDP Africa's country's GDP should be invested in research. Are we doing it? Why aren't we doing it? And what should we be doing?
That's a very good one, Chris. I mean, the short answer is that we are not making nearly enough investments into agriculture on the continent. That's one. Even though, in terms of percentage of populations involved in agriculture, agriculture is clearly the biggest sector in most African countries. And I like the point you are bringing now around our use of the biodiversity that Africa has. When you looking at livestock systems, when you're looking at crop systems, it's quite strange that in 2020 we actually need a program like what is called the Orphan Crop Program, which is led by Professor Yana Shapiro, which is trying to identify food crops across the continent that you will not find in a supermarket. And that's because we've actually de-skilled people from knowing how to use those crops. Here in South Africa, Nestle at some point tried to use moroch into one of their 2-minute noodles. And the thing failed because there's no production system that was able to commercially produce sufficient moroch to create a line of 2-minute noodles that would sustain itself in the market. So I think we need to do justice, yes, to the research services on the continent. Almost every country has fantastic scientists. But the honest truth, Chris, is that the research and the technology that they are developing often does not find a way out of the labs, out of the hallowed halls of the institutions. As a biochemist myself, I've found more liberation by being able to work on the ground with rural farmers and creating solutions in local using what people already know, and then bringing my technology and background to help farmers to actually achieve more. So I think we need more extension, like Benny said, and that extension needs to be in the villages and not in big offices in the cities. And I think that can be part of the solution.
Benny, I see you shaking your head in agreement there. You want to add?
Yes, thank you for that. I agree upon that very important input. I want to mention something else. I think that we cannot make some research, say, down in Siberia and think we can make it applicable to Africa. I want to break it much more down. I think every farmer should do his own research on his own land, because my farm is not the same that my neighbors even, not even, say, 2 or 3 districts far away. So that's for me a big problem. So if a farmer wants to be sustainable, they have to make sure that he do his own research and see what is the best for me to do here. The big problem that we do have, especially with the small-scale farmers, is economy of scale. And that's the reason why I said pull together resources and make sure that you try to create a better environment. It's not necessary that every farmer down the road have his own combine. You can pull together and work together, and one combine can actually address a lot of farmers, for an example. But there's something else I want to put on the table, Chris, and this is that for me, if we do not allow the market principles and that laws from nature do the work, we have to stick to that. That's the challenge for us. But the market principle is decisive to make sure who is the best farmer. And there are certain things that a farmer should actually realize. And I call it farming ability or farming expertise. If you don't accept the responsibility, if you don't have a sense of urgency, I cannot tell my sick cow tonight, I'm party, I will look after you tomorrow. I have to attend to it now. Otherwise, I will not have a cow tomorrow. Something like that. So that sense of urgency is very important. And then a farmer is a person, especially, have to be equipped to make decision-making very, very efficiently and quickly. Because if he wait for the worms and do not make a decision, he will not have a crop anymore, stuff like that. And then general management skills. And I like this input regarding training and equip ourselves with better approaches to life. A farmer, I think he should be the best equipped person in the whole world, because you have to address every type of situation and you have to make decisions on a sense of urgency And you have to accept responsibility for every inch of every decision you have to make. And if people do not have that, the market will throw you off. So go and do your research, make sure you address those issues, accept that responsibility, and build for the future. Because this is economic process with skills regarding the soil and land and everything else. But with that, build for the future, because if I do not plant today, I will not have a crop tomorrow. Thank you.
Todd, as a farmer, irrigation farmer along the Orange River, capital intensive, just give us some insight about the technology that you would not be able to farm there. I mean, from the irrigation to the seed. I mean, just give us some insight on your reliance on the sort of technology that Syngenta produces, for instance, that makes it possible for you to be a high-value producer irrigation farmer.
Yeah, thanks. To get back to research and that just earlier question, I think for the guys doing the research, thank you to the Syngentas and that have the budgets to do that. I think that is a huge part of our business. Maize seed, for example, and making sure that the drought resistant, the conditions are changing. We touched on climate change. And without getting into a big debate about what climate change is and all that, I think just to give you some perspective, last year, on the 28th of October, we had frost here in Douglas, which affected the maize crop quite severe, the wheat crop, excuse me, quite severely. And this year was a very cold winter, which has also affected our yields negatively. So it was cold in September. There were cold winds, and suddenly we had 40-degree heat. So the research to increase, to make the seeds and that more, whether you want to call it drought resistant or the cultivars better, that research is important. And when it comes to the products and that we use on the ground, these guys have to, whether it's a Kainoff or a Syngenta or those guys, they jump through big hoops to make sure that they're good products, first of all, but also that they are environmentally friendly. They are regulation around that. So yes, we're very thankful for that research, because it's a bit of adapt or die situation. What goes into irrigation farming, what goes into a little bit of around here in our area, is that we need to be sustainable. So we need to look after our soils. The practices of going, we do double cropping. So we need to make sure that we're looking after our soil. We're managing. We use probes or moisture management sensors to make sure the moisture of the soil. All these small things play a role in our harvest at the end. And I think if you miss one of those areas, then you have a huge effect on your harvest at the end of the day. And yes, I love what you're saying about being a breadbasket of Africa, or Africa being the breadbasket of the world. I think we have that potential, which is really, really exciting. And we've touched on it, is that the tenacity of the farmer, the passion of the farmer, doesn't matter where you are, doing your own research, I think that's what we have. We can work together to really to take this forward, because this COVID story, people have realized how important food is. You touched on it, Chris, which is wonderful. So, yeah.
Just talking about these transformative technologies, the technologies that are going to leapfrog us. That figure that you mentioned, Dr. Larks, the 10% increase in productivity reduces poverty by 2%. I mean, that's quite extraordinary. From Syngenta's point of view, what are the technologies that you are working on at the moment that you see hold great potential. And then after you, Dr. Charles, will move over to you. But just firstly, Dr. Laus, what are those technologies that you feel hold the greatest promise?
Thanks, Chris. I think that two maybe kinds of breakthroughs we are working on to describe. One is building on what Todd said before, it's developing better seeds that are more drought resistant and seeds that are resilient to fall armyworm. So we have one product in the registration process in South Africa. We hope to be able to make available soon that combines a couple of traits that will be resilient to fall armyworm, right? I mean, this will be a major breakthrough in dealing with this infestation. The other piece is building on Benny, saying that the farmer needs to make his decision every single day and take responsibility for this. We try to build decision support, right? The digital insights you can get from weather forecast, soil measurement, forecasting pests, forecasting when best to drill your seeds. All of this can help the farmers make their decisions, and the intelligence that goes into this is massively increasing. And so we are having a new system that is called CropWise. We are adapting them to local needs and will be able to support farmers.
Dr. Charles, you said that you have thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, thank you very much. For us as the Red Cross, we're looking into something called forecast-based financing. So really being anticipatory instead of being reactive. So up until now, many humanitarian organizations have always reacted to disasters. And what we're saying is that, can we predict disasters better? And can we really support the communities before the disaster strikes? It's a forecast-based financing that we call it, and it's really working better with the meteorological services. We know that the predictions are more accurate, and we can even get them 10 to 15 days ahead in terms of being accurate. And our premise is that, we don't really want to know what the weather will be, but what the weather will do. So meaning, if it's going to rain heavily, will it cause flooding, and will it cause the crops to be destroyed? If that's the case, what can we do in anticipation of that? And we have a lot of examples. I can give examples of the Mozambique cyclone, where through this approach, we're able to quickly get into the communities, quickly support our community members in terms of moving to higher grounds or preparing shelter for them in advance. And this is the same with drought as well. When drought is about to come, how do we, as Dr. Petra said, how do we bring the drought-resistant seeds to the communities, ensuring that we're able to give, rehabilitate our boreholes within the communities, and to be able to have water to at least water the plant. So it's really important that we move from being reactive to being more anticipatory. And that's what we as the Red Cross has done. And I think in terms of food security, this is where we also work with our smallholder farmers. And that's what I said earlier on, that we're trying to come up with a 10-year approach where we consistently work with our farmers. And I like what Benny said in terms of research. We need to translate the research from a global level to the local level and really see how we can support the smallholder farmers to learn from each other, to continue to strengthen their capacities, but also to continue to share experiences and share tools and resources. And I think that's what makes us unique on the continent. That's within our communities, we're very much together, we're very much aligned, and we just need to use that more to the benefit of our smallholder farmers. So the technology we see from a humanitarian perspective is being more anticipatory, looking at the weather, focusing more on the meteorological data, and using that in our programming to ensure that we become much more proactive than being reactive. Thank you, Chris.
Mandla, here's your great opportunity. You've gotten three. All the politicians have agreed. You can choose three big interventions to make on small scale, on smallholder farmer level, to get them productive? What are the 3 biggest blockages that we need to sort out?
Well, Chris, I think for me, I'd have to start with the soil. To say, yes, it's true that Africa does have the largest available fertile soils or arable soils in the world right now, but we've got no clue what those soils look like from a nutritional perspective. And so I would go on a massive campaign to understand the soil health of all African soils. Number 2, I would also say we need to focus on what I call integrated systems. How do we help smallholder farmers integrate their cropping systems to their livestock systems? As you know, in the modern world, we tend to be slightly anti-livestock and from a climate change perspective. But the truth of the matter is that we cannot have sustainable food production without sustainable crop and livestock systems in rural areas. It's a choice that farmers shouldn't have to make between growing crops or keeping their livestock. I think we need to help them to do both. And then I think the third one, Chris, would be I would focus on what I call the rural-urban nexus and how that needs to develop towards creating sustainable food systems. How can it be that farmers who were able to produce food for faraway markets? I mean, we are talking earlier that there is Africa needs to feed itself, but do we know that Africa is the biggest exporter of cocoa in the world? And in those countries where cocoa is produced, farmers are still in extreme poverty. So we need to change that. We need to fix that and make sure that we're creating resilient and sustainable food systems in Africa in response to the urbanization and the removal of skills from rural areas, and by managing that rural and urban nexus. So those would be the 3 things that if the politicians granted me the opportunity, I would focus on: soils, integrated systems, crop and livestock, and then focusing on rural-urban nexus.
Martin, it's very interesting that you're talking about livestock, and I'm sure Todd doesn't agree because they're irrigation farmers and they just believe in growing crops. But the integration of livestock into cropping systems has become increasingly a bigger focus in what is referred to as regenerative farming. I don't know if everyone's heard about it. It's been popularized by the documentary on Netflix, Kiss the Ground, that has just appeared. And we at Landbouweekblad, we do 3 big regenerative farming conferences every year in South Africa. And that looks at those basic principles of not disturbing or disturbing your soils as little as possible, keeping them covered, keeping roots in your soils for as long as you possibly can, and then using animals to graze those crops to get carbon back into the soils. And that's basically the whole idea, is getting carbon back into your soils, which removes the carbon out of the atmosphere, which addresses climate change, but also improves the fertility and the water retention capacity of your soils. Now, while a lot of research has been done on this type of farming, why are we not seeing greater adoption of greener types of farming, for want of a better word? Anyone can pitch in here, whoever wants to comment. Todd, you want to go?
Well, I'll give it a crack, Chris. I think we are and we aren't, right? We've got 2, I think, conundrums. On the one side, the commercial side of agriculture is trying to self-correct to what Benny rightly called, farming using natural laws and natural principles. So a lot of the industrialized agricultural systems are trying to correct. And it's actually great to see that companies like Syngenta are leading the charge in talking about sustainable agricultural production. But if the truth be told, the sector where I work in, which is smallholder farmers, they've always been using regenerative agricultural models. But the incentive to do that and do that more sustainably has not been there. I mean, if you look at the Zambian government's, maize program, it completely comes in and says, okay, boom, here's some hybrid seed, here's some chemical fertilizer. No one even stops to say, in this village, what's the state of the soil? What's the pH? Do we need to correct the pH? So we're throwing good inputs, but we're not actually looking after the soil that those inputs need to land, and we wonder why we're not getting the yields that we should. So I think it's a case of sometimes the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing, and us not having an integrated approach. Because what you're describing, Chris, about regenerative agriculture is that it forces us to look at doing things in an integrated way, about how the livestock system supports the cropping system, how the environment or the landscape is but one. We need to ensure that the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and all the cycles are actually integrated and self-enhancing. So I think we have it in our hands to promote that, and it requires a change of stance from governments, policymakers, from the private sector, and for us, development practitioners as well.
Todd, you wanted to make a comment, and I see Benny also wants to add something. You can go.
I'd just like to make a comment on, I think for the soils, looking after soil is important. In our Douglas area, we see that we're trying to find ways that we can put the nitrogen back into the soil. So taking what's left over after you harvested and working it back in. Our challenge is that there's not actually, because we're double cropping, there's not actually time for a lot of that dry material to break down. However, it's at least we're finding ways to put it back in the soil. I think a lot of our friends that do dry land farming put cattle on their lands, and I think that's fantastic. So that's in the Douglas area. That's one of the big challenges that we face, is because you're double cropping. We can use crop rotation. Yes, your legumes, your lucerne. We planted a bit of grass or for the cattle. We've got extensive cattle farms as well in the area. So looking after our soils as well on our cattle farms, which in our rainfall area of about 120 mil, 120 mils a year, we've got to be careful. We talk about a brittle environment, and if we overgraze that or overutilize that, we're looking for trouble. So when we talk about sustainability and regenerative, I think there is a move automatically in that direction, because farmers realize, well, besides the financial pressure that is on us to make repayments, or the input costs in our irrigation farming is huge numbers per hectare. Yes, if you pull it off, it can go well, but we have to look at ways forced to find ways that are sustainable so that we can carry on. If we put too many cattle in a camp or on a farm, and in the good years and the bad years, we see that there's nothing. So that's just a comment that I'd like to make. Yes, we need to find ways of, and we are thinking, we finding ways to go no-till. That's still our big challenge.
Benny, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, Chris, there's some different viewpoints here. We can look into this matter. For sure, I agree upon what Todd and everyone mentioned now, is that we have to keep this balance in nature and on the farm to make sure it's sustainable. We have to look after our resources. That's very important. But there's another challenge as well, and that's something we cannot shift aside, and that is the growth of population throughout the world. And therefore, we have to make sure that we have in our production process enough yield and production to make sure that we can feed the population of the world. And that is also a challenge. So a lot of people have very great concern about GMOs, for sure, and that's perhaps something that they can discuss. But if we are not on that road, will we have enough food for the people? That's the other question. So This is a very complicated thing, and I think we needed perhaps a little more of research regarding this whole process. What is the best balancing act that we have to do regarding our natural resources to make sure that's sustainable, but there is also enough food for our population, because that is growing. And what are we going to do regarding that? If we stick to our principles that my grandfather do, if they got in those days in the Eastern Highveld, say 4 tons a hectare, wow, it was a very good farmer. Nowadays, he will not be on his farm anymore, because that is how competitive he became throughout the world. So this is a little bit more complicated. There's a lot of issues you have to address here. But at the end of the day, we have to make it sustainable. And that is for me very important, to be there for the next generations as well. Thank you.
Petra, you wanted to come in?
Maybe a short comment. I was heartened to hear from everyone, how farmers care for sustainability. And Chris, you're asking, so why is it not happening, and how could it happen faster? A lot of this is certainly awareness and training. So this is why we have, as part of our Good Growth Plan, the smallholder trainings as well, where we have reached 3.6 million farmers until 2019. And we also train on soil health, and those farms who had better soil health, they could increase their yield by 50%. So there's a huge element of helping understanding, and this is tough work, right? Because this is happening locally on the ground and not, as you said earlier, somewhere in the global research center. And this is where we need the alignment with many partners to make this happen.
Petra, if I can just ask you a follow-up question, how much collaboration is there between big multinationals like Syngenta and other companies working in other part of the agricultural sphere to sort of almost provide a complete service to smallholder farmers? I mean, is there any collaboration at all?
So there is one project I became recently aware of that is currently being hosted by the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, which, however, tries exactly that. There is agri-services for smallholders who are locally based. It's entrepreneurs we try and train. They can offer all in one hand that smallholders need. They need inputs, fertilizers, spray services, agronomic training, access to machinery, access to finance, and access to insurance. Because even if you take a loan to finance your upgrade and intensification, if you have then a climate change problem and or pest and your harvest is gone, you are stuck with a loan. So you need insurance against this. And all of these services are being pulled together by these agri-entrepreneurs, and we have a project starting in Kenya and in 2 more countries, which I can't remember on the spot, where we try exactly that approach. And these agri-entrepreneurs, they provide inputs not only from Syngenta, but actually mainly from other companies as well, because this is a full service platform. The other piece, of course, where we have common standards also with other competitors is the training, right? So we align a lot under CLI, Crop Life, Africa, Middle East, and we also share our programs and the standards. So there is a minimum level that we all try to adhere to.
Thank you, Petra. Dr. Charles, just something I want to ask you before I forget. My understanding of institutions like the Red Cross is that they're quite reactive. That there's an international crisis, humanitarian crisis, and then they move in and they try and sort out the problem. But doesn't it all start really with food? I mean, if we could sort out the food insecurity, and I mean, I'll come back to those figures that Mandla mentioned earlier. I mean, if we could sort out the food issue, we're sorting out a whole lot of issues. We're sorting out early childhood development. We're sorting out civil unrest. We're sorting out migration to cities. We're sorting out societal issues. Isn't food where we should be focusing all our energies and efforts?
You're right. I mean, food is very important and is the start of many things. However, even if we focus on food solely, we still know that disasters will strike. And I'll give you examples when I was based in South Sudan for 3 years, where within the communities, we were able to provide food, but we still saw that children were not able to go to school. So how do we bridge that gap between food and education? And some of the things we've been able to do is to ensure that within the schooling system, there's at least one hot meal a day, so that kids are encouraged to go to school to get that one meal. So I think, yes, food is very important, but also really looking into issues around preparedness. And we have a big program now that we're looking into community preparedness and preparedness in terms of many aspects, in terms of education, in terms of psychosocial support, in terms of mental health, and we're seeing all that now with the COVID response. So food, I believe, is really important, and it is the start, but it is not always the end. But I think we need to be, as much as possible, incorporate all the various sectors, because a healthy mind obviously can do many things. In communities where we see that there is not enough food, then we see that so many other things come in, including conflict. Another thing that we've been able to do with the resources that we have is that we've been able to give the choice back to the community members. So we have a program we call cash transfer programming, whereby we use disasters as the entry point, and we see that communities that are affected, the most needed people, we give them cash. And these are also smallholder farmers, where we give cash to, and they can decide on their own how they want to use the cash. So it's gone at the days when we used to actually distribute food. We've now seen that logistically it's a nightmare. It takes way too long. So how do we do it in a more innovative manner? How do we do it with digital technology and digital transformation? And again, South Sudan is a brilliant example where in those days we used to fly planes and actually drop food to the community members because of the conflict, but also because the transportation facility wasn't there in terms of roads. Now with cash, it's so much easier, so much faster, and people can get food on the table so much quicker, as well as other things that they need. So food is important, but we have to look at things holistically and bring all the other aspects in as well. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Dr. Charles. Talking about cash, Todd, you mentioned the astronomical input costs in irrigation agriculture. Financing, and Mandla, I'm going to come to you in a minute. How big a problem is that for farmers? Has it become a bigger problem? Because as I understand it, the profitability of agriculture has also over a period of time diminished. So you need ever more finance to produce ever bigger crops, putting farmers under ever bigger pressure, correct?
Chris, and I think your input costs are getting so high, your margins are decreasing. So we are forced to be better farmers, which I think is the tenacity of our South African farmers and every small entrepreneur, small businessman out there, making the economy work. So yes, there's a lot of pressure on the farmers, and I think with technology and all that coming in, just made a note here. I mean, we put a weather station up on the farm so we know what's happening, immediate feedback, all these small things that are helping us to make sure that we can harvest the crop at the end of the year, because the common saying here is that you're 6 months away from bankruptcy. So and remember, we're doing the double cropping, so every 6 months it's a new game. You've got to be on it. For your livestock, your other guys out there, drought comes in and you can't afford to feed them. You don't have fallow. So just a few thoughts on that. So we got to have healthy ecosystems. We fortunately, in terms of Our water supply, there's our Eskom supply, because that's a lot of what runs our pumps. We have to look at that. I think to keep the Orange River system, I'm glad you experienced a bit of the fly fishing and we invite people to come and experience the nature and what we have. Come see us plant potatoes and harvest and see them being lifted from the ground. It's incredible to see from one little potato that they're 12, 15, 25 potatoes that grow from one. So to look after our waters, to make sure that we're doing well, so that we can continue farming and providing food, as you said. So if we don't look after our beautiful Orange River, our 2,200 kilometers of Orange River, and the waters, then this is gonna keep building on us. And is the smaller guy going to then stay in business, or is it just farms getting bigger and bigger, like the trend that we see globally? And I'm not an expert on that, and I'm sure there's a lot of opinion around that. But I think we want to encourage the small guy just to keep doing his thing. Otherwise, he will be swallowed up by. And I think that's what we're talking about, your small holder, if I understand it correctly.
So Mandla, there I want to come back to you. I mean, I come from a farming community in the Northeastern Cape that has basically dwindled down to nothing in a period of 30 years. From a reasonably vibrant farming community. And I mean, we see that trend all over the world, that consolidation. And while it's sort of, it's easy to have a dispassionate conversation about it, like a friend of mine always says, if a group of 5 farmers sit around and say, well, we all agree about economies of scale, you have to be comfortable with the fact that 2 of you aren't going to be here in 10 years' time. And then suddenly the reality sinks in. So my question is, how do we finance smallholder farmers, and how do we do so sustainably? Is it sustainable for Dr. Charles to be pumping money into smallholder agriculture for 2 years and then to withdraw? Or should we be looking at adjusting the farming systems in such a way that you don't need so much input, to be using natural products, to be using composts, to be trying to get the natural systems to be producing some of those services that we putting in out of a bag?
I mean, Chris, this is a fantastic question, and I think there's a raging debate across the world right now about the economic viability of small-scale farming. I mean, there is a move towards bigger is better. And I think, personally, I think in Africa, we're probably still a generation away before we can even contemplate the kind of aggregation of farms that we've seen, for example, here in South Africa. On the rest of the continent, I think we're still a generation away. If that is true, we then need to relook the environment and say, how do we get the most out of this? And I believe that's pretty much what the Chinese and some of the South Asians have done. They've really put a sharp focus on saying, how do we make the smallest farm as viable as possible? And I think part of it, Chris, has been around what I call diversification of activities on the farm. I'll give you an example. One of our biggest programs, Solidaridad in Southern Africa, is a soybean program, where we realized that farmers were locked in a poverty trap by growing maize all the time. They needed an alternative. So the first thing was, well, how do you grow soybeans in the middle of Mozambique or in eastern Zambia, where there isn't an established seed system for getting this good quality material? So we started by focusing on that in the first 2 years, making sure there's good availability of seed, providing the agronomy, to a point where you've got small-scale farmers in those areas getting to the 2.5 ton level of yield. And then that created the next problem to say, well, you've just changed them from just being commodity producers of maize to become commodity producers of soy. How do you turn that around? Because the same farmer sells his soybeans to a trader, and then waits for a truck from Lusaka to sell him chickens and eggs. So we said, hang on, how about if we then say as the next step of income diversification, we create the capacity locally for these farmers to have counter-cyclical income in the form of poultry production for both meat and eggs. But to do that, we couldn't take a bird that needs climate control like the cob bird and drop it in the middle of 40-degree heat in eastern Zambia. We had to find the right genetics for that kind of place. So the answer, Chris, is that we need to start looking at living income for these farmers and then finding ways in which we can diversify their income earning capacity, because that is what will create a good lending point for finance. Because you're not just financing rain-fed agriculture, you are financing shorter cycle things like chicken production, vegetable production, and that then creates, in my view, the potential for vibrant financial services. But I do also want to throw a spanner in the works and say, you know what? It's a cliche that you can't fund people in the rural areas. Cell phone companies make a pile of money in the rural areas. They've found a way of providing a service to people who are very poor, and they actually make their most profit in the rural areas. There is no place in Southern Africa where you will not see a cell phone tower or an advert for a cell phone service. So there is ways of making money in rural areas, and I think our financiers also need to think out of the box. And I think the East Africans have proved that with M-Pesa, where they totally rethought access to financial services. You've got millions of Kenyans who've never been inside a bank, but are so integrated into the financial system. And I think that's what we need to do in Southern Africa. To use local language, lost the bank. You know, you need the cell phone. So technology will save us.
Henny, I want to just get back to you. You know, we talk about smallholder farmers and getting them to step up. And, you know, the example I often think about is our communal wool farmers in the former homelands of the Transkei and the Ciskei and Lesotho. And that amazing story of how the big wool brokers like BKB wanted their wool. And it was a win-win situation where you plug these small guys into a valuable value chain and got guys in the middle of Lesotho to export wool to Europe. Which created incredible wealth. Where I come from in the Eastern Cape, I am slightly skeptical about the viability of establishing small-scale farmers because there isn't the rainfall that you have in Malawi or Rwanda. So only, you know, you can only have so many farmers. That doesn't mean that you can't aggregate flocks and herds, for instance. But you as a commercial farmer, how do you see it? Do you see a place for both, or do you see that we are on this trajectory on getting continuously bigger and more industrialized, or is there place for both?
Chris, that is our reality and we cannot change it in the short term, but we have to work to change it. At this stage in South Africa, we have 68% of our population that is already urbanized. Therefore, we need a commercial sector that produce food for a market, that they can actually get their food there. But in my viewpoint, in not all the cases, I think there are small-scale farmers that are very successful and they make a good success out of their practice. But a lot of these small-scale farmers at this stage, I think it's more than a socio-economic reality, that they actually do not produce enough food for themselves for the whole year. They are still dependent on social grants. And then we have to discuss what are we going to do, and I think that is something on the table of our Department of Agriculture. But they have to go and see what can we do to help those people to get in a better position, to be more productive, as we heard all throughout this whole discussion, to utilize the land much better and rise your yield so that they can become productive and produce food for a market. If you ask me what is a commercial farmer, my definition is that's a person that produces food for a market. If it's 10 crates of tomatoes or 10,000 crates of tomatoes, you sell it on a market, even if it's on the pavement. I said you are in the commercial sector because you sell food. But if it's only for yourself and you don't have enough, that is our challenge. And specifically, if you look into the financing models in these days, our financial institutions, the way back, they use your land as a collateral. But in these days, they look in your business plan and see, can you pay back? What is your possibilities to address your loan from me? Is it possible for you to address that? So there's a lot of things that is changed in the past time. But I still want to say that the person have to accept this responsibility to be a farmer. It's not easy to be a farmer, especially in South Africa, that is much more drought-stricken than in the middle of Africa. We have very severe conditions in some times. And if you haven't got a lot of capacity within your farming borders, if you haven't got economy of scale plus, if you don't have that, if there's a little problem, you're already in deep problems and you cannot easily come out of that. So we have a big challenge, and a lot of these people sit on very good soil, but they don't utilize it correctly at this stage. You can look into the former homelands. That is from your best soil, but not all of them are very productive at this stage. But I think that is a challenge for us in South Africa, that we have to go and see what can we do to make sure that we are going to utilize that land better. But in certain cases, a lot of these farmers, as I can call it like that, because they sit on farmland, are not actually productive in their mindset. They are more, it's a way of living. It's a way of, I sustain myself. It's not to gain a better tomorrow. It's for today. And that's a problem. When I talk to a lot of these small-scale farmers, I don't experience this urge for doing something now important. I wait for tomorrow. And that is a mindset problem that we perhaps have in certain areas. And those people, if it's a male, female, black, white, that make that decision, I work for tomorrow, I can take you, and you know it better than me, to a lot of very, very successful female farmers, black farmers, but there's still some white farmers that only, they are just there. They don't make this decision of working for a better tomorrow. So it's not a race issue or a gender issue. It's a mindset issue of people. You make a success if you accept these responsibilities that actually is added to be a farmer. If not, at the end of the day, the market principle will sort you out. That's the reality. Because we have a problem with this, because I don't think that a lot of our small-scale farmers are in a sustained position that they can sustain themselves and unconditionally for the future. And that is a challenge for us, that we have to make sure, what can we do? So our reality is we have both. We cannot change it around. I think a big portion of the small-scale farmers is more a social economic reality. And I think perhaps some other issues and other rules should be applicable there, because it's not farming in practice. But if it's on farming land, we have to try and see what can we do to make that a farming practice that is sustainable for the benefit of those people themselves. And this is a challenge. And then we talk about the mindset of people. Then we came back to this research, to that extension officers that we talk about, that's capable of training these people, helping them to overcome their reality to become a better farmer, because they sit on farming land. And I think that is a challenge for South Africa. And I think all over the world, perhaps in certain other areas as well. And I cannot talk on behalf of that. Your example, I just want to finish off with this one, Chris, is that way back in Zimbabwe, in the old Rhodesia in those days, they had this tribal trust lands. And with cotton, a lot of small-scale farmers utilize the fact that there's infrastructure because of the commercial sector. They put their bag of cotton on their bicycles back, and they drive it right all the way down to the cotton dumping site where they actually put it down, and they make some money out of that. So if you don't have the infrastructure, that is the roads and the distribution channels and the communication channels, we can go on and on with that, it actually kills the small-scale farmer as well. So they utilize the fact that the commercial sector are there, and that creates the opportunity for them to have a good infrastructure where they can capitalize on. So that is something else that we can look into as well. So both of them is very important. That is our reality. Thanks.
You're muted, Chris.
Chris, you're muted.
Sorry. I say my suggestion would be that Mandla and Dr. Charles get together with Todd and Benny for a beer and go and visit Todd up along the Orange River Gentlemen, we've already lost Dr. Laux. She's gone to a next appointment. This brings us to the end of a very interesting panel discussion and a very interesting session. Thank you, everyone, for making the time to join this panel and speaking on how to unleash the potential of agriculture. I think that we've had a few insights. I think that we have discussed the potential. I think we're all in agreement that the potential is there. I think it's always quite sad because we all seem to know what the solutions are, but we struggle to get there. But we stay hopeful. Mandla, with you and Dr. Charles at the helm of things, I'm sure we'll make progress. So thank you to our speakers, and also thank you to Syngenta for making today's discussion possible. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. Next up is the panel on sustainable food markets and trade. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Benny, Todd, and Dr. Charles. It's always great to be in your company and to get all the insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much there. That was Mr. Chris Burgess, who is the CEO of Landbouw Weekblad, excuse me there. And thank you very much to all the panelists that participated in that discussion. That was truly, truly fruitful. I learned quite a bit there, particularly about studying the soil and getting to know African soil. And most importantly, I think one of the panelists had reiterated there that we have no reason to be in poverty because we have a wealth of agricultural resources. We have systems that could ensure food supply. So very, very great conversations there. And I truly look forward to what all the panelists will develop. Once again, thank you to Syngenta for the partnership in ensuring that this panel discussion takes place. And once again to Cape Media for the content, seeing fit that an agricultural discussion, particularly where sustainability is concerned, truly matters and is indeed important. I will see you in a second as we introduce our next facilitator for the last panel of the day.